I'm Jessica Armstrong, and I was 19 when my entire life changed because of a prank. One moment I was diving into our family lake, the next I couldn't feel my legs. When I screamed for help, my brother Tyler laughed. When I cried that something was wrong, my parents called me dramatic. 3 days later, an MRI revealed a spinal fracture that could have been treated immediately. Instead, their disbelief left me partially paralyzed for life and them facing criminal charges. Before I dive into how my family's disbelief changed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt ignored when you needed help the most. Growing up in suburban Minnesota, I had what most would consider a perfectly normal teenage life. Our two-story home with its neatly trimmed lawn and white picket fence looked like something straight out of a family sitcom. My dad, Robert Armstrong, worked as a construction manager for a prominent development company, while my mom, Diane, was a nurse at the local hospital. Then there was my older brother Tyler, who at 22 had just graduated from college with a business degree. And me, Jessica, the baby of the family at 19. Our family dynamics weren't perfect, but whose are? Dad worked long hours, but always made it to my track meets. Mom was the nurturing type who kept our home running smoothly while juggling hospital shifts. She was especially proud of her garden, which provided fresh vegetables for our dinner table throughout the summer months. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, with a modest lake house about an hour's drive from our main residence that served as our getaway during the summer months. From the outside looking in, we appeared to be the ideal American family. But beneath that perfectly maintained exterior were subtle cracks that would eventually shatter our entire foundation. I had always been athletic. Running felt like freedom to me, and I'd been on the track team since freshman year of high school. By senior year, I was being scouted by several colleges, with the potential for athletic scholarships that would help ease the financial burden of higher education. My dream was to become a physical therapist, inspired by the sports medicine professionals who had helped me through a minor ankle injury during sophomore year. "You've got real potential, Jessica," my coach would tell me. "With your times improving like this, you could compete at the collegiate level and maybe beyond." That validation meant everything to me, especially since at home, I often felt overshadowed by Tyler. He had always been the golden child in my parents' eyes. When we were younger, they would brush off his teasing and pranks with "boys will be boys," or "he's just playing around." As we got older, that dismissive attitude continued. Tyler had a history of pranks. Most were harmless enough, replacing the sugar with salt, short-sheeting my bed, jumping out from behind doors to scare me. But occasionally, they crossed a line. Like the time he convinced me my goldfish had died and flushed it down the toilet, only for me to find out later it had been alive when he did it. Or when he told all the boys at school I had a contagious skin condition right before prom, leaving me without a date. Whenever I complained to my parents about these incidents, their response was predictable. "You're overreacting, Jessica," my mom would say with a sigh. "Don't be so sensitive," my dad would add. "Your brother is just having a little fun." This pattern of minimizing my feelings became so normalized that I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive? Maybe I should just laugh it off like everyone else seemed to? There was one incident that stands out in my memory now, a warning sign I should have paid more attention to. During my junior year, I developed a severe case of food poisoning after eating at a new restaurant with friends. I spent the entire night vomiting and in excruciating pain. When I begged my mother to take me to the emergency room, she felt my forehead, declared I didn't have a fever, and said I was exaggerating to get out of a math test the next day. "Your stomach is just upset, Jessica. Take some Pepto and go back to bed," she insisted, despite the fact that I was doubled over and crying. The next morning, when I couldn't even stand up straight, my friend's mother took one look at me when she came to pick us up for school and drove me straight to urgent care instead. The doctor diagnosed severe food poisoning and dehydration, administering 4 fluids and medication. When my mother arrived, she seemed more embarrassed than concerned. "She's always been a bit dramatic about illness," she told the doctor with an apologetic smile. "Gets that from her father's side of the family." Despite incidents like these, I was excited about my future. Senior year was approaching, and with it, my final track season and the scholarship opportunities that could follow. Several universities had shown interest, including my dream school with one of the best physical therapy programs in the country. I had even started decorating my bulletin board with college brochures and inspirational quotes to keep me motivated. Next year at this time, I'll be setting records on a college track, I told my best friend Amber as we flipped through course catalogs. And 4 years after that, I'll be helping other athletes recover from their injuries. Life seemed full of promise. The invisible fractures in our family foundation didn't seem important in the grand scheme of things. I had learned to navigate around Tyler's pranks and my parents' dismissive attitudes. As long as I focused on running and my future goals, I could handle anything else that came my way. Or so I thought. Little did I know that our annual summer vacation at the lake house would change everything. That the subtle patterns of behavior that had been established over years would culminate in a moment that would alter the trajectory of my life forever. That my brother's jealousy of the attention my athletic achievements were getting would push him to go too far. That my parents' tendency to dismiss my pain would nearly cost me my life. The last normal day I remember was packing for our lake trip. Throwing summer clothes, swimsuits, and running shoes into my duffel bag. Looking forward to morning runs along the lakeside trail and afternoon swims in the cool, clear water. Completely unaware that I would return home a different person entirely. Our annual trip to the lake house was supposed to be a time of relaxation and family bonding before the busy fall season began. For my parents, it was a break from their demanding jobs. For Tyler, it was a chance to unwind after the stress of final exams and graduation. For me, it was an opportunity to train in a different environment and prepare for my upcoming senior year and track season. The lake house itself wasn't anything fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom cabin with a spacious deck overlooking the water. The property included a private dock with a diving platform that extended into the deeper part of the lake. That dock had been my favorite spot since childhood. I loved the feeling of launching myself into the air and experiencing those brief seconds of weightlessness before slicing through the water's surface. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in early August. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze that made the heat bearable. After unpacking the car and settling into our rooms, we gathered on the deck for a barbecue dinner. Dad grilled burgers while Mom prepared a salad from vegetables she'd brought from her garden. The conversation flowed easily, centered around safe topics like Tyler's new job prospects and Dad's latest construction project. Then Mom turned to me. "Jessica, tell us more about those college coaches who came to your last meet." The one from State University seemed very interested. I couldn't help but smile with pride. Coach Williams said my 400-meter time was one of the best he's seen from a high school senior. If I can shave off another second or two this season, I might qualify for a full athletic scholarship. "That's my girl," Dad said, reaching over to squeeze my shoulder. Always pushing herself to be better. I noticed Tyler's expression darkening as our parents lavished praise on my athletic achievements. He picked at his food, avoiding eye contact with anyone at the table. The tension was palpable, at least to me. Mom and Dad seemed oblivious, continuing to ask questions about my training schedule and scholarship opportunities. "You know, not everything is about running in circles," Tyler finally interjected. "Some of us had to work hard academically to get through college." "Of course, honey," Mom said quickly. "And we're incredibly proud of your business degree. Jessica just happens to have different talents." "Different talents," Tyler repeated with a snort. "Like the talent for getting out of doing the dishes by claiming she needs to rest her legs?" "That's not fair," I protested. "I do my share around here." "Tyler, Jessica," Dad warned. "Let's not ruin our first night with bickering." The conversation moved on, but the undercurrent of resentment remained. After dinner, I offered to clean up to prove Tyler wrong, but Mom shooed me away. "You go rest, dear. You'll need your energy for your morning run tomorrow." I caught Tyler's eye roll as I left the kitchen, but I chose to ignore it. This was nothing new. He had always been jealous of the attention my athletics brought me. What I didn't realize was how that jealousy had been festering, growing into something dangerous. The next day passed uneventfully. I went for my morning run. We had lunch in town and spent the afternoon swimming and sunbathing. It wasn't until the second evening that things began to unravel. I was sitting on the dock, dangling my feet in the water and watching the sunset when Tyler joined me. His sudden friendliness should have been my first warning sign. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" he said, sitting down beside me. "Yeah, it is," I agreed cautiously. "Remember when we were kids and we used to have diving contests off the platform?" He nodded toward the wooden structure at the end of the dock. I smiled at the memory. "You always won because you were bigger and could make a bigger splash." "Let's do it again," he suggested with enthusiasm that seemed forced. "For old time's sake." Now? It's getting dark. The water's still warm, and there's enough light. "Come on, Jess. When did you get so boring?" I hesitated, but part of me wanted to prove I wasn't the uptight, dramatic person my family often made me out to be. "Fine. One dive." Tyler grinned. "I'll go tell Mom and Dad to watch. They can judge who makes the better dive." While he went to get our parents, I walked to the end of the dock and climbed up onto the diving platform. It was about 5 feet above the water, high enough to perform a decent dive, but not so high as to be dangerous, or so I thought. As I waited, I noticed the platform felt a bit wobbly, but I dismissed it as normal wear and tear on the aging structure. Tyler returned with our parents, who settled into chairs on the deck with drinks in hand, ready to be entertained by their children's antics. "Ladies first," Tyler called out with a sweeping gesture. I stood at the edge of the platform, arms extended above my head in proper diving form. I bounced slightly to get some lift, and that's when I felt it. The platform shifted beneath my feet more than it should have. Before I could react or step back, I was already in motion, pushing off into my dive. What should have been a clean entry into the water turned into disaster. As I pushed off, the platform gave way beneath me. Instead of launching forward in a smooth arc, I fell awkwardly, my lower back and hips striking the edge of the partially collapsed platform before I tumbled into the water. The pain was immediate and excruciating. I screamed as I hit the water, inhaling liquid in the process. For a terrifying moment, I was disoriented, unable to tell which way was up. When I finally broke the surface, coughing and sputtering, the pain in my back was so intense that I could barely move. "Help!" I gasped. "Something's wrong." From the deck, I heard laughter. Tyler was doubled over, pointing at what must have looked like a comically bad dive from their perspective. "Drama queen," he called out between fits of laughter. That was the worst dive I've ever seen. I tried to swim toward the ladder at the side of the dock, but my legs weren't responding properly. With mounting panic, I realized I could barely feel them. Using just my arms, I managed to drag myself to the ladder, but climbing out was nearly impossible. "I'm serious," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "I can't move my legs right. Something happened to my back." Tyler's laughter began to fade as he noticed my genuine struggle. Dad finally stood up from his chair on the deck. "Jessica, stop fooling around," he called. "Just climb out and try again if you want." "I can't." I was fully crying now, clinging to the ladder, the lower half of my body feeling increasingly numb. "Dad, please, I need help." Mom finally seemed to register that something might actually be wrong. "Robert, go help her," she said to my father, her nurse's instincts finally kicking in. Dad made his way down to the dock, muttering about overreactions and attention-seeking behavior. When he reached me and saw the difficulty I was having, his expression shifted from annoyance to mild concern. "Did you hit your head?" he asked, reaching down to help pull me up. "No, my back," I gasped as waves of pain shot through my spine. "When the platform broke, I hit my back." Dad managed to lift me out of the water and onto the dock, where I lay on my side, shivering despite the warm evening air. Tyler had approached by this time, his face pale. "The platform broke?" Dad asked, looking back at the diving board. In the fading light, it was difficult to see, but the angle of the platform was clearly off. "It was wobbly when I stood on it," I explained through gritted teeth. Then it just gave way. Mom had joined us on the dock by now, kneeling beside me with her professional demeanor taking over. "Where exactly does it hurt, Jessica?" "Lower back, and I can't feel my legs properly." The admission brought fresh tears to my eyes. They're tingling and numb. You probably just pinched a nerve, Mom said, though her furrowed brow betrayed her uncertainty. Let's get you up to the house and dry you off. A hot shower and some ibuprofen should help. Shouldn't we go to the hospital? I asked, the fear in my voice unmistakable. Dad and Mom exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Let's not overreact, Dad said firmly. If you're still in pain tomorrow, we can consider it. Between Dad and Tyler, they managed to help me up to the house, half carrying me as my legs refused to cooperate fully. Each step sent jolts of agony through my spine, but my parents seemed determined to minimize the situation. Once inside, Mom helped me change into dry clothes while Dad examined the diving platform. The bolts were loose, he reported when he returned. Platform needs to be completely replaced. It's rotted through in spots. I noticed a strange look pass between Tyler and Dad, but I was in too much pain to process it fully. All I knew was that I needed medical attention, and my family was inexplicably resistant to the idea. That night, I lay in bed, tears silently streaming down my face as the pain increased and the sensation in my legs decreased. I could hear my parents discussing me through the thin walls. She's always been prone to exaggeration, Mom was saying. Remember when she insisted she had appendicitis, but it was just menstrual cramps? I don't know, Diane, Dad replied. She seemed really shaken up. Trust me, I'm a nurse. If something was seriously wrong, I'd know it. She needs rest, not an expensive emergency room visit for what's probably just a bruised tailbone. Their voices faded as they moved further away from my room. Left alone with my pain and fear, I tried to wiggle my toes, panic rising as I realized the effort it took to create even the slightest movement. Something was seriously wrong, but how could I make them believe me when they were so determined to see me as the girl who cried wolf? As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. Why had the diving platform collapsed at that exact moment? And why had Tyler been so eager for me to use it? The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window and the distant sound of birds chirping by the lake. For one blissful moment, I forgot what had happened. Then I tried to turn over, and the searing pain in my back brought reality crashing down. I gasped, tears springing to my eyes as I realized the numbness in my legs had worsened overnight. Mom? I called out weakly. Dad? My mother appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day. You're finally awake. It's almost 10 o'clock. I need help, I said, my voice breaking. I can't move my legs properly. Mom approached the bed with a skeptical expression. Let me see. She pulled back the covers and pressed on my legs in various places. Can you feel this? Barely, I admitted. It's like they're asleep, but worse. She frowned slightly but quickly composed her features. Muscle spasm from the impact, probably. I'll get you some muscle relaxants and anti-inflammatories from my medical bag. Mom, I think I need to go to the hospital. This isn't normal. Jessica, she said with a sigh that contained equal parts frustration and condescension, I'm a medical professional. If I thought you needed emergency care, I would take you. Trust me, this is just soft tissue damage and your body's natural response to trauma. But, no buts. Take the medication, rest today, and you'll start feeling better. Her tone left no room for argument. I'll bring you some breakfast. She returned with toast, juice, and pills. After making sure I swallowed the medication, she informed me that she, Dad, and Tyler were going into town for supplies. We'll be back in a few hours. Try to get some rest and don't get yourself worked up. Stress will only make the muscle spasms worse. Left alone in the lake house, I lay in bed fighting waves of pain and growing terror. The medication dulled the agony somewhat, but did nothing for the progressive numbness. After an hour of staring at the ceiling, I decided I needed to prove to myself and my family how serious this was. With tremendous effort, I pushed myself into a sitting position, gritting my teeth against the pain. Swinging my legs over the side of the bed took every ounce of willpower. I stared down at my bare feet on the wooden floor, focusing intently on sending the message from my brain to my toes, move. They responded sluggishly, as if the connection was faulty. Taking a deep breath, I pushed myself up to standing, using the nightstand for support. For a brief second, I remained upright. Then my legs buckled beneath me, and I crashed to the floor with a cry of pain and frustration. I lay there, sobbing, unable to pull myself back up. This was proof. They would have to believe me now. I would show them I couldn't walk, and they would finally take me to the hospital. It was nearly 2 hours before I heard the car pulling up outside. 2 hours of lying on the hard floor, alternating between tears of pain and attempts to drag myself back to the bed using just my arms. I had managed to pull myself halfway across the room toward the door when it opened. "Jessica," Mom exclaimed, dropping her shopping bags. "What on earth are you doing?" "Trying to prove to you that something is wrong," I said through gritted teeth. I tried to stand up and my legs gave out. "I can't get back up." Dad appeared behind Mom, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. "For heaven's sake, Jessica. This is getting ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous," I shouted, my frustration boiling over. "I can't walk." "How much more proof do you need?" Together, they lifted me back onto the bed, my legs dangling uselessly. Tyler hovered in the doorway, his face uncharacteristically solemn. "She really did fall pretty hard yesterday," he said quietly. "Maybe we should." "Not you two," Dad cut him off. "She's fine." Jessica has always known how to get attention when she wants it. "This isn't about attention," I protested, wiping angry tears from my face. "Something is seriously wrong with my back or spine. I need a doctor, not accusations." Mom placed her hand on my forehead. "No fever. Let me check your reflexes." She used her knuckle to tap just below my kneecap. My leg jerked slightly, but not with the normal response. "See? Your reflexes are still functioning. If there was spinal damage, they wouldn't respond at all." "That doesn't explain why I can't walk or why I can barely feel my legs," I countered. "Psychosomatic symptoms are very real to the person experiencing them," Mom said in her professional nurse voice. "Your body is responding to the trauma and your anxiety about it." "Are you saying it's all in my head?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm saying that your mind is making the symptoms worse than they actually are," she clarified. "It happens all the time, especially with patients who tend toward the dramatic." I looked to my father for support, but his expression had hardened. "Enough, Jessica. Your mother is a medical professional. If she says you're going to be fine with rest, then that's what you need." "But..." "No more arguments," Dad said firmly. "We're not cutting our vacation short because you're having a melodramatic episode." They left me alone again, the door closing with a finality that crushed my hope of being believed. Through the walls, I could hear them discussing me. "She's always been like this," Mom was saying. "Remember when she was convinced she had a concussion after Tyler accidentally hit her with that Nerf ball? Should we at least call Dr. Mendez for advice?" That was Tyler, sounding uncertain. "And tell him what?" "That Jessica took a bad dive and now claims she can't walk?" "He'd think we're as dramatic as she is," Dad replied. The conversation moved away from my room, leaving me isolated with my fear and pain. I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand, planning to call Amber or Coach Stevens for help. To my dismay, it wasn't there. Had I left it somewhere else in the house? Later that afternoon, when Mom brought me soup and more medication, I asked about my phone. "We thought it would be best if you didn't start texting your friends with exaggerated stories," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your father has it. You can have it back when you start showing improvement." "You took my phone?" The betrayal cut deep. "How am I supposed to call for help?" "Help with what, Jessica? We're right here." And frankly, this attention-seeking behavior has gone far enough. Her voice had an edge I rarely heard. "Your father and I have important jobs to get back to. Tyler has job interviews lined up. We can't cater to this performance much longer." That evening, my condition worsened. The pain in my back intensified, shooting down my legs in lightning bolts of agony, despite the medication. Then, around midnight, I experienced the most humiliating moment of my life. I lost control of my bladder. Mortified and sobbing, I called out for my mother. When she entered and realized what had happened, her clinical detachment finally began to crack. "This isn't normal," she murmured, more to herself than to me, as she helped clean me up and change the sheets. "I told you," I whimpered. "Please, Mom. Something is really wrong with me." For a brief moment, Doubt flickered across her face. Then she composed herself. Sometimes muscle relaxants can affect bladder control. It's a known side effect. But I could tell she was less certain than before. The next morning brought no improvement. If anything, the numbness had spread higher, and the pain had become nearly unbearable. Even my parents seemed less convinced by their own dismissals, exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Tyler had become unusually quiet and kept finding reasons to check on me throughout the day. During one of these visits, when we were alone, he sat on the edge of my bed with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Jess," he began hesitantly, about the diving platform. Before he could continue, Dad appeared in the doorway. "Tyler, your mother needs help with lunch." My brother left without finishing his thought, leaving me to wonder what he had been about to say. Was there something about the platform I didn't know? By the third day, I was desperate. My parents were discussing taking me home the next day, but still resistant to the idea of a hospital visit. "If you're not better by the time we get home, we'll make an appointment with Dr. Mendez," Mom had promised, but I knew that could be days away. While they were occupied with packing, I dragged myself out of bed again. The pain was excruciating, but I was driven by a new purpose. If I couldn't walk to get help, and I couldn't call for it, I would find another way. Using my arms to pull myself along the floor, I inched my way to the family computer in the living room. Every movement was agony, but the fear of permanent damage outweighed the immediate pain. It took nearly 30 minutes to traverse the short distance, but finally, I pulled myself up onto the computer chair. With shaking hands, I logged into my email account and composed a desperate message to Coach Stevens. "Something happened at the lake house. Injured my back diving. Can't walk. Parents won't take me to hospital. Please help. Lake Haven Resort, Cabin 12. I hit send just as I heard footsteps approaching. I didn't have time to close the email window before my father entered the room. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he saw the computer screen. "Getting the help you won't give me," I replied, too exhausted and in too much pain to be tactful anymore. His face darkened with anger as he read the email I'd sent. "This is completely unacceptable, Jessica. You've gone too far this time." He disconnected the computer's power cord with a sharp yank, but it was too late. The message had already been sent. "Back to bed." "Now," he ordered, lifting me roughly from the chair. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through my spine, and I cried out. "Robert, be careful with her," Mom cautioned as she entered the room, drawn by my cry of pain. "She just emailed her coach claiming we're neglecting her," Dad snapped. "This has gone beyond a bid for attention, Diane. She's making serious accusations now." Mom's face paled. "Jessica, how could you? We've been taking care of you around the clock. By ignoring that I can't walk? By taking my phone so I can't call for help?" "That's not care, that's control," I shot back, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The argument that followed was the worst in our family's history. Accusations flew from all sides. Dad threatened punishments ranging from grounding to canceling my track season. Mom vacillated between anger at my betrayal and professional assurances that my symptoms would resolve with time. Through it all, Tyler remained conspicuously silent, watching with an expression that seemed to contain equal parts guilt and fear. By the time they returned me to my bed, the family was fractured along new lines. Mom and Dad retreated to discuss their options while I lay there, praying that Coach Stevens would read my email in time. As the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across my room, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. Someone had arrived at the cabin, and from the raised voices that followed, it wasn't a casual visitor. Hope flared in my chest. Had my desperate message actually reached someone who would believe me? The voices outside grew louder, one of them unmistakably belonging to Coach Stevens. Relief washed over me in such a powerful wave that I nearly passed out. Someone had come. Someone who might actually listen. "Where is she?" I heard Coach demand, his normally calm voice tight with concern. "This is completely inappropriate," my father responded. "You can't just show up at our private residence based on a melodramatic email. 3 days with a back injury and inability to walk warrants immediate medical attention, Mr. Armstrong." As Jessica's coach and a mandatory reporter, I have an obligation to ensure her well-being. Their footsteps moved through the house, approaching my room. The door swung open to reveal Coach Stevens, his tall frame tense with worry, flanked by my parents whose expressions ranged from embarrassment to indignation. "Jessica," he said, rushing to my bedside. "What happened? Your email said you can't walk." Before I could answer, Mom interjected. "She took a bad fall while diving at the dock. She's bruised her back and is experiencing some temporary muscle weakness, but she's being well cared for." Coach Stevens looked from her to me, his eyes questioning. "Is that true, Jessica?" "No," I said firmly, my voice stronger now that I had an ally. "I fell when the diving platform collapsed. I hit my back, and since then I've been losing feeling in my legs. I can barely move them now, and yesterday I hesitated, embarrassment momentarily overriding urgency. I lost control of my bladder. They took my phone so I couldn't call for help." Coach's expression hardened as he turned to my parents. "Is this accurate? She's been unable to walk for 3 days, and you haven't sought medical attention." "She's exaggerating," Dad insisted. "Jessica has always had a flair for the dramatic." "Then you won't mind if I test something?" Coach turned back to me. "Jessica, I'm going to touch your leg in different places. Tell me if you can feel it and how clearly." He proceeded to press various points on my legs, from thigh to ankle. My responses varied from barely to not at all, growing worse the further down he went. He then asked me to try moving my legs voluntarily. The minimal response seemed to confirm his suspicions. "Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong," he said, standing up straight, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Your daughter needs emergency medical attention. These symptoms are consistent with potential spinal cord injury. Every hour that passes without treatment increases the risk of permanent damage. We were planning to take her to our family doctor when we return home tomorrow," Mom offered weakly. "That's not good enough." Coach Stevens was already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance right now, or I can drive her to the emergency room myself. But she is getting medical attention today." "You have no right," Dad began. "Actually, I do," Coach interrupted. "As a school employee, I'm a mandated reporter. If you refuse to get her proper medical care at this point, I am legally obligated to report it as medical neglect." The word neglect seemed to hit my parents like a physical blow. They exchanged glances, the reality of the situation finally beginning to penetrate their denial. "We'll take her," Mom said quickly. "We can get to the hospital faster than waiting for an ambulance out here." "I'm coming with you," Coach stated, not a question but a declaration. Within minutes, I was being carefully transferred to our SUV, Coach Stevens supporting my upper body while Dad handled my legs. The pain of being moved was excruciating, but the relief of finally getting help outweighed everything else. The drive to the regional medical center was tense and mostly silent. Coach sat in the back with me, my head resting on his lap as I lay across the seat. My parents sat in front, occasionally exchanging whispered comments I couldn't quite hear. Tyler had elected to stay behind at the cabin, his face ashen as we departed. When we arrived at the emergency room, the staff responded immediately to Coach's explanation of my symptoms. I was quickly transferred to a gurney and wheeled into an assessment room, leaving my parents to handle the registration paperwork. "Spinal injury protocol," the emergency physician ordered after a brief examination. "Page neurosurgery and get her to MRI stat." Everything moved with dizzying speed after that. Blood was drawn, vital signs monitored, questions fired at me from all directions about the incident and my symptoms. When my parents were finally allowed into the assessment room, the doctor addressed them with an urgency that seemed to finally penetrate their denial. "Your daughter has symptoms consistent with a significant spinal cord injury," she explained. "We need to get imaging immediately to determine the extent of the damage and whether surgical intervention is required." Why wasn't she brought in immediately after the injury? Mom, her professional nurse demeanor crumbling, struggled to respond. "She's had episodes of exaggerating symptoms before. We thought it was just bruising and muscle strain." The doctor's expression made it clear what she thought of this explanation. Loss of motor function and sensation in the lower extremities is never something to dismiss. The delay in treatment may have serious consequences for her recovery potential. Dad, looking increasingly ill, asked, "But she will recover, right?" "That depends entirely on what we find on the MRI and how quickly we can address it," the doctor replied, her tone making it clear that time had already been wasted. I was wheeled away for the MRI, a claustrophobic experience made bearable only by the knowledge that finally, someone was taking my condition seriously. The technicians were gentle and reassuring, explaining each step of the process. When I returned to the emergency department, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The emergency physician was now accompanied by a neurosurgeon, and both wore grave expressions. My parents stood to the side, looking shell-shocked. Coach Stevens remained steadfastly nearby, his presence a comfort in the chaos. "Jessica," the neurosurgeon addressed me directly, "the MRI shows a fracture dislocation of your L1 vertebra with compression of your spinal cord. This is a serious injury that requires immediate surgical intervention." He turned to the computer screen, displaying images that meant little to me but caused my mother to gasp audibly. "The fracture is unstable and fragments are compressing the spinal cord. Had this been treated immediately after the injury, we could have decompressed the cord before significant damage occurred." "And now?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. "We'll still perform emergency surgery to stabilize the fracture and remove the pressure on your spinal cord, but I have to be honest, the 3-day delay means there may be permanent neurological damage. The extent won't be clear until after surgery and recovery." The gravity of the situation descended on the room like a physical weight. My mother, her medical knowledge making the prognosis all too clear, began to sob quietly. Dad stood frozen, his face ashen. "How soon can you operate?" Coach Stevens asked, the only one maintaining composure. "We're preparing an operating room now," the neurosurgeon replied. "We'll be taking her up within the hour." As the medical team made preparations, a hospital social worker entered the room, introducing herself to my parents. Their conversation was held just out of my earshot, but their expressions told me everything I needed to know. Questions were being asked about the delay in seeking treatment. Explanations were being scrutinized. Notes were being taken. The reality was setting in. This wasn't just a medical emergency anymore. It was potentially a case of medical neglect. Before I was taken to surgery, Tyler arrived, having gotten a ride from a neighbor at the lake. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he approached my gurney with visible hesitation. "Jess, I need to tell you something," he said in a low voice, glancing nervously at our parents who were still engaged with the social worker. "What is it?" I asked, the medication they'd given me for pain making my thoughts slightly fuzzy. "The diving platform." He swallowed hard. I loosened the bolts. "It was supposed to be a prank. Just to scare you, not to hurt you." I never thought. The confession hit me with the force of a physical blow. "You did this to me? On purpose?" His face crumpled. "Not this. Never this. I just wanted to shake your confidence a little. You were getting all the attention with your track scholarships and college visits. I just wanted to hurt me," I finished, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical pain. "Get away from me, Tyler." A nurse appeared, announcing it was time to go to surgery. As they wheeled me away, I caught one last glimpse of my family, Mom crying, Dad looking lost, Tyler's face a mask of guilt and regret. Coach Stevens gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before I disappeared through the double doors. In the pre-op area, as the anesthesia began to take effect, I had one clear thought. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not my body, not my future, not my family. Everything had changed the moment that platform collapsed beneath me. As consciousness slipped away, I wondered if I would wake up able to feel my legs again, or if this was my new reality, paralyzed by a brother's jealousy and parents' disbelief. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the sterile smell of hospital antiseptic. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. Where was I? Then the events leading up to surgery came rushing back, and with them, a surge of anxiety. I tried to wiggle my toes, desperate to know if the operation had restored feeling to my legs. There was something, not normal sensation, but not complete numbness either. A strange tingling, like static electricity, coursed through my lower limbs. Before I could process what this meant, a nurse noticed I was awake. "Welcome back, Jessica," she said, checking my vital signs. "Dr. Rafferty will be in shortly to discuss your surgery." My legs, I managed to croak through a parched throat. "Can I move them?" "Let's wait for the doctor to assess your neurological function," she replied diplomatically. "He'll be able to give you the most accurate information." It wasn't long before the neurosurgeon appeared, accompanied by a team of residents and the same emergency physician who had first examined me. Their expressions were carefully neutral, not the grim looks of bearers of the worst news, but not the relieved smiles of doctors delivering a miracle either. "Jessica, the surgery went well from a technical standpoint," Dr. Rafferty began. "We successfully stabilized the fracture and removed the bone fragments that were compressing your spinal cord." I steeled myself for the "but" I knew was coming. "However," he continued, confirming my fears, "the delay in treatment allowed significant cord edema, swelling, to develop, which caused additional damage. Some of the neurological impairment may be permanent." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It means you're likely looking at a condition called incomplete paraplegia. You have some preservation of motor and sensory function below the level of injury, but not full function." He proceeded to examine me, testing reflexes and sensation in my legs. "Can you feel this?" he asked, touching various points. I reported the patchy, inconsistent sensations. "Pressure here, nothing there, pins and needles elsewhere." "Now try to move your right foot for me." I concentrated, willing my foot to respond. After what felt like an enormous effort, my foot moved slightly. "Good." "And the left?" This time, despite my concentration, there was barely any response. Dr. Rafferty nodded, making notes in my chart. "This is actually more promising than we initially feared. The preservation of some motor function suggests potential for improvement with intensive rehabilitation." "Will I walk again?" The question that had been haunting me since the accident finally escaped my lips. He met my gaze directly. "I can't make absolute promises, but given your age, physical condition before the injury, and what I'm seeing now, I believe you have a good chance of regaining some ambulatory function. Whether that means walking with assistive devices or achieving independent ambulation will depend on many factors, including how diligently you work in physical therapy." It wasn't the unequivocal yes I had hoped for, but it wasn't a definitive no either. I clung to that shred of hope like a lifeline. As the medical team continued their examination, a new figure entered the room, a woman in business attire who introduced herself as Melissa Kendrick from Hospital Social Services. "I'd like to speak with Jessica alone, if that's possible," she requested. The medical team nodded and filed out, promising to return later to discuss my rehabilitation plan. Once we were alone, Ms. Kendrick pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Jessica, I need to ask you some questions about what happened and the delay in seeking medical attention. This may be difficult, but it's important for your ongoing care and safety." Over the next hour, I recounted everything: the diving accident, my parents' dismissal of my symptoms, the confiscation of my phone, and finally Tyler's confession about loosening the bolts on the platform. Ms. Kendrick took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly listening intently. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said when I had finished. "I want you to know that what happened to you, both the initial injury and the delay in treatment, shouldn't have happened. There are procedures in place to address situations like this." "What kind of procedures?" I asked, suddenly apprehensive. "I've already filed a report with Child Protective Services, as the law requires in cases of suspected medical neglect," she explained gently. "Additionally, given your brother's admission about deliberately tampering with the diving platform, the police have been notified." The reality of what this meant hit me like a physical blow. Are my parents going to be arrested? I can't predict exactly what will happen, but there will be an investigation. Your parents' decision to delay medical treatment despite clear signs of serious injury will be examined very carefully. Before I could process this information, there was a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, one of them unmistakably my father's. The door opened, and a hospital security officer stepped in. "Everything okay in here?" he asked Miss Kendrick. "We're fine," she assured him. "Is there a problem outside?" The patient's parents are demanding to see her. Hospital administration has temporarily restricted their access pending the CPS investigation. The police are also here and would like to speak with her when you're finished. My head was spinning. Police? CPS? Restricted access? The consequences of what had happened were spiraling outward at a dizzying rate. After Ms. Kendrick left, 2 police officers entered, introducing themselves as Detectives Mercer and Johnson. Their questions echoed many of those the social worker had asked, but with a particular focus on Tyler's actions and my parents' response to my injury. "Your brother has already given a statement admitting to tampering with the diving platform," Detective Mercer informed me. "He claims it was meant as a prank, not to cause serious injury. Would you say that's consistent with his previous behavior?" I thought about all the pranks Tyler had pulled over the years. Annoying, sometimes hurtful, but never physically dangerous. Until now. He's always liked practical jokes, I admitted. But this was different. This crossed a line he'd never crossed before. The detectives exchanged glances. "And your parents' reaction when you couldn't walk, was that consistent with how they typically responded when you were injured or ill?" I hesitated, torn between family loyalty and the reality of what had happened. They've always been skeptical when I complained about being sick or hurt. My mom's a nurse, so she thinks she can diagnose everything at home. They've called me dramatic before, but they've never ignored something this serious. Detective Johnson nodded, making notes. "Thank you for your honesty, Jessica. We know this is difficult." After they left, Coach Stevens was finally allowed in to see me. His familiar presence was a comfort in the midst of chaos. "The doctors filled me in on your prognosis," he said, taking the chair beside my bed. "It sounds like there's reason for optimism." I nodded, unable to keep the tears from welling up. "But everything's falling apart. The police are involved, and CPS and my parents can't even see me, and Tyler admitted he caused the accident on purpose, and—" "Whoa, slow down," Coach interrupted gently. "One thing at a time. Right now, your only job is to focus on healing. The legal stuff will sort itself out." "My track scholarship," I said suddenly, the realization hitting me anew. "That's gone, isn't it?" Coach didn't try to sugarcoat it. "The full athletic scholarship, yes. But there are other types of scholarships, Jessica. And the school will still want you, injury or not." It was small comfort in the face of everything else, but I appreciated his honesty. The next few days passed in a blur of medical assessments, police interviews, and beginning the initial phases of physical therapy. I learned that my parents had been formally charged with child endangerment and medical neglect, while Tyler was facing juvenile charges related to the tampering with the diving platform. 5 days after my surgery, a court hearing was held to determine my temporary guardianship, given that my parents were now prohibited from making medical decisions on my behalf due to the pending charges. Coach Stevens, to my surprise and gratitude, volunteered to serve as my temporary guardian. "Are you sure?" I asked when he told me. "It's a huge responsibility. My wife and I have already discussed it," he assured me. "We have the spare room, and she's a physical therapist, which will be helpful for your recovery. Besides, you need a safe place to heal, and we want to provide that." The court approved the arrangement, and plans were made for me to move in with Coach Stevens and his wife upon my discharge from the hospital. A week after surgery, I had my first family visitation, supervised by a court-appointed observer. Mom arrived first, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. "Jessica," she whispered, approaching my bed cautiously. I don't even know what to say. Sorry seems completely inadequate. Then why didn't you believe me? The question that had been burning inside me finally escaped. You're a nurse. You should have recognized the symptoms. She wiped away tears. I've been asking myself the same question every day. I think I was so used to seeing you as my dramatic little girl that I couldn't see the woman in front of me who was truly suffering. My preconceptions blinded me to the reality, and my professional arrogance made me think I knew better than you what was happening in your own body. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was an honest one. We talked for a while longer, about my prognosis, about the criminal charges she and Dad were facing, about what would happen next. Dad's visit was briefer and more awkward. Unlike Mom, he seemed unable to articulate his feelings, alternating between stilted apologies and attempts to explain his thought process that inevitably trailed off into silence. Tyler wasn't permitted to visit due to the nature of his charges and the fact that his actions had directly caused my injury. But he sent a letter, delivered by his juvenile court advocate, that contained page after page of remorse and explanation, how his jealousy had festered, how he'd only meant to scare me a little, how he would do anything to take it back. I wasn't ready to forgive any of them, but I recognized the first step toward whatever our future relationship might be. As my discharge date approached, the reality of my new life began to take shape. I would be in a wheelchair, at least initially, with intensive physical therapy scheduled 3 times a week. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. With hard work, I might eventually progress to walking with braces or crutches. Full, unassisted walking was a more distant possibility, not guaranteed, but not ruled out either. The day I left the hospital, rolling out in a wheelchair that felt simultaneously alien and like a part of me, I caught a glimpse of myself in a reflective surface. The girl who had bounced on that diving platform, full of athletic promise and taking her healthy body for granted, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone I was just beginning to know. As Coach Stevens helped me into his adapted van, I wondered what this new version of Jessica Armstrong would become. One thing was certain, my life had been irrevocably altered, not just by the physical injury, but by the revelation of how fragile family bonds could be and how quickly one's entire reality could change. 6 months after the accident, I sat in my wheelchair by the window of Coach Stevens' guest room, now my room, watching snow fall gently outside. Winter had transformed the landscape, covering everything in a pristine white blanket that hid imperfections beneath. If only recovery could be so comprehensive, so complete. My life had settled into a new routine. 3 days a week, I attended physical therapy sessions with Sarah, Coach's wife, who had taken a special interest in my case, both professionally and personally. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I worked with a tutor who helped me keep up with my senior year coursework, since returning to regular school wasn't yet feasible. Weekends were for rest and what Sarah called normal teenage activities, watching movies, having friends over, trying to maintain some semblance of the life I'd had before. The physical progress was slower than I'd hoped, but steady. I had regained significant sensation in my right leg and partial sensation in my left. I could now stand for short periods using parallel bars, my right leg bearing weight while my left required a brace for support. The doctors called it an asymmetric incomplete paraplegia, a clinical term that couldn't begin to encompass the daily struggle of relearning how to use my own body. "Good morning, Jessica," Sarah greeted me, poking her head into my room. "Ready for PT in 30 minutes? I nodded, turning my wheelchair away from the window. "I've been doing my morning stretches already." She smiled approvingly. "That's what I like to hear. Coach is making pancakes if you want some before we get started." The Stevens had been more than just guardians over these months. They had become family in a way my biological family had failed to be. Their home, hastily adapted with ramps and bathroom modifications to accommodate my wheelchair, had become my sanctuary. After breakfast, Sarah and I got down to the business of physical therapy in the converted home gym. Today's focus was gait training with the walker, a challenging exercise that left me exhausted but satisfied when I managed to take 10 consecutive steps with minimal assistance. "You're making excellent progress," Sarah commented as she helped me back into my wheelchair. "Dr. Rafferty will be impressed at your next assessment." "Do you think I'll ever run again?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for months finally finding voice. Sarah didn't offer false hope. It was one of the things I appreciated most about her. "Elite track competition? That's unlikely given the nature of your injury. But walking independently? Possibly even jogging someday? Those are realistic goals, based on your progress." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the truth, and I had learned to value truth above comfortable illusions. The legal consequences of what my family had done continued to unfold in parallel with my physical recovery. My parents had pleaded guilty to reduce charges of child endangerment, avoiding jail time but receiving 3 years of probation, mandatory parenting classes, and substantial community service hours. The medical board was reviewing my mother's nursing license, with a suspension likely. Tyler's case had been handled in juvenile court, resulting in a sentence of community service, mandatory counseling, and probation until his 21st birthday. The judge had been influenced by his immediate confession and obvious remorse, as well as character references from his college professors. I had received regular letters from all of them, watching the progression from initial shock and self-justification to deeper understanding and genuine remorse. Mom's letters were the most insightful, often delving into painful self-examination of the patterns that had led to such catastrophic failure. Dad's were briefer but increasingly vulnerable as he confronted his own biases and failures. Tyler's remained the hardest to read, raw expressions of guilt that sometimes left me in tears, unsure if I was crying for him or for myself. The question of whether to allow them back into my life loomed larger as my 18th birthday approached. Once I was legally an adult, the court-mandated restrictions would lift, and the decision would be entirely mine. One unexpected bright spot had emerged in the form of adaptive sports. Coach Stevens had introduced me to a local wheelchair basketball program, and to my surprise, I had taken to it with the same competitive spirit that had driven my track career. "You're a natural," the team coach had told me after my third practice. "Your upper body strength and spatial awareness give you a real advantage." It wasn't the same as feeling the ground beneath my feet as I sprinted around a track, but it gave me a new athletic identity when I'd thought that part of my life was over. College plans had shifted dramatically. The track scholarship was gone, but several schools had reached out with academic scholarship offers after learning of my situation. Additionally, the lawsuit against my parents' homeowners insurance had been settled, providing a trust fund specifically designated for my education and ongoing medical needs. "Have you made a decision yet?" Coach Stevens asked one evening as we reviewed college brochures spread across the dining table. I picked up the packet from State University, my former dream school with the elite track program. It now held different appeal, a renowned disability advocacy program and top-tier accessibility accommodations. "I think so," I said, tapping the brochure. "Not for the reasons I originally wanted to go there, but it feels right." Coach nodded approvingly. "They'd be lucky to have you." As winter melted into spring, another decision point approached. Tyler had written asking if he could visit in person. It would be our first face-to-face meeting since the hospital, when I had been too angry and traumatized to truly process his confession or apology. After much consideration and several sessions with my therapist, I agreed to a supervised meeting at a neutral location, a cafe near Coach Stevens' house. The day of the meeting arrived with a flutter of anxiety in my stomach. Coach drove me to the cafe, helping me transfer from the car to my wheelchair with practiced efficiency. "I'll be right over there if you need me," he said, indicating a table across the room that would give us privacy while keeping him within eyesight. Tyler arrived precisely on time, looking both older and smaller than I remembered. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant demeanor I barely recognized. He spotted me immediately but approached slowly, as if afraid I might will away at any moment. "Hi, Jess," he said softly, standing awkwardly beside my table. "Hi," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "You can sit." He did, his eyes taking in my wheelchair and the changes in my appearance. I had lost weight during my hospital stay but had regained much of it in muscle through upper body training. My hair was shorter now, a practical decision that had become a statement of my new identity. "You look good," he offered, then immediately backtracked. Considering." "It's okay," I interrupted his fumbling. "I know what you meant." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken words and shared history that had been irrevocably altered. "I don't know how to do this," Tyler finally admitted. "I've rehearsed what to say 1,000 times, but nothing seems adequate." "Then don't try for adequate," I suggested. "Just be honest." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Jessica. Not just for what I did, which was inexcusable, but for who I was before that, The brother who should have protected you but instead saw you as competition. The person who thought making you look foolish would somehow make me feel better about myself. Why did you do it? The question that had haunted me for months. Not just the platform, but all of it. The years of pranks and putting me down. Tyler stared at his hands. Jealousy, mostly. You were always the one who got the attention, the praise. Dad would work late and miss my baseball games, but he'd always make time for your track meets. Mom would brag to her friends about your times and records, but barely mention my grades. I wanted them to notice me too. So you made sure they noticed me in the worst possible way, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. I never meant for you to get hurt, he insisted, looking up with tears in his eyes. I thought the platform would just wobble and scare you, maybe make you look a little silly. I never imagined it would collapse or that you'd hit your back. And I definitely never thought Mom and Dad would refuse to take you to the hospital. But they did, I said simply. And now we're all living with the consequences. We talked for nearly 2 hours, excavating years of sibling rivalry, parental favoritism, and misplaced resentment. It wasn't easy, and several times one or both of us had to take a break to collect ourselves. But by the end, something had shifted, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward understanding. I've changed my major, Tyler told me as our meeting drew to a close. I'm studying social work now. I want to help kids who are in dysfunctional family situations before things go as wrong as they did with us. It was the first thing he'd said that made me feel a glimmer of hope for his future, and possibly for our relationship. That sounds like a good path for you, I said honestly. As he prepared to leave, Tyler hesitated. Would it be okay if I wrote to you about how the classes are going? Maybe visit again sometime. I considered his request carefully. You can keep writing. As for visiting, let's take it one step at a time. The irony of my choice of words hit us both simultaneously, one step at a time, and for the first time in our lives, we shared a moment of genuine, non-malicious laughter. As spring blossomed into summer, my physical progress continued. I graduated from the walker to forearm crutches for short distances, a milestone that Dr. Rafferty celebrated as a significant achievement given the initial prognosis. Your determination is paying off, he told me during my 1-year follow-up appointment. The neural pathways are rebuilding, albeit slowly. Continue with this level of effort, and we may see even more improvement than I initially predicted. The anniversary of the accident brought with it a complex mix of emotions, grief for what I had lost, pride in how far I had come, and anxiety about the future that still stretched uncertainly before me. I marked the day by wheeling myself down to the local track, where Coach Stevens met me with a surprise, a racing wheelchair. Time to try something new, he suggested with a smile. That evening, with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I circled the track in my new racing chair, feeling the familiar rush of speed and freedom I had thought was lost to me forever. It wasn't running. Nothing would ever be quite the same as running had been, but it was something powerful and uniquely mine. As I made my final lap, pushing harder than before and feeling the exhilaration of velocity, I realized that while the accident had taken much from me, it had not taken everything. I was still an athlete. I was still Jessica Armstrong. And I was still moving forward, different, damaged, but determined to create a meaningful life from the pieces that remained. 2 years after the diving platform collapsed beneath me, I wheeled myself across the stage at State University's orientation for new disability advocates. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had always planned to attend this university, but for entirely different reasons and in entirely different circumstances. Welcome, everyone, I began, addressing the room of students, faculty, and community members. My name is Jessica Armstrong, and 2 years ago, a preventable accident left me with incomplete paraplegia. Today, I want to talk about why medical advocacy matters and how a culture of dismissing young people's pain can have life-altering consequences. Public speaking had never been my forte before the accident. I had let my running speak for me. Now, unable to rely on that form of expression, I had discovered a voice I never knew I possessed. My story, painful as it was, had power to affect change, and I was learning to harness that power. The journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After completing my senior year through a combination of home tutoring and part-time attendance at a new high school, I had enrolled at State University with a dual focus on disability studies and pre-law. My goal had shifted from sports medicine to disability rights law, a path that felt both personally healing and socially meaningful. My physical recovery had plateaued somewhat after the 18-month mark. I could now walk short distances with forearm crutches and leg braces, though the wheelchair remained necessary for anything beyond about 50 yards. My right side had recovered significantly more function than my left, creating an asymmetry that required constant adaptation. The nerve pain that had been my constant companion since the injury had diminished but not disappeared, managed now with a combination of medication, meditation, and physical therapy. What had evolved more dramatically was my relationship with my family. After that first tentative meeting with Tyler, we had established a cautious new connection. Monthly coffee meetings had become weekly phone calls, and eventually, a genuine, if changed, sibling relationship. He had thrown himself into his social work studies with the same intensity he had once applied to tormenting me, and I could see the positive transformation in his outlook and behavior. My parents had been a more complicated reconciliation. After their probation began, they had both entered intensive therapy, separately and as a couple. Mom had lost her nursing license for a year, but had used the time to volunteer with patient advocacy groups, gaining a new perspective on medical care that centered the patient's experience rather than the provider's expertise. Dad had struggled more with his role in what happened, his natural stoicism making it difficult for him to process the complex emotions of guilt, shame, and regret. Our first family therapy session, 6 months after the accident, had been brutally difficult. Raw emotions had erupted in ways that left all of us emotionally exhausted. But it had also been the beginning of honest communication after years of suppressed feelings and unacknowledged patterns. I always felt like I had to scream to be heard, I had told them during one particularly intense session. And even then, you acted like I was making noise for no reason. We confused dismissing you with toughening you up, Dad had admitted. I thought I was teaching you resilience, but I was really teaching you that your feelings didn't matter. These painful conversations had gradually given way to a new family dynamic, one built on listening rather than dismissing, on validation rather than judgment. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, but we were all committed to the work of rebuilding what had been broken. The lawsuit settlement had provided not just for my education and medical needs, but also for a foundation I had established called Believe Them First, a nonprofit focused on medical advocacy for teenagers and young adults. The mission was simple, to ensure that no young person's medical concerns were dismissed due to stereotypes about teen dramatics or attention-seeking behavior. Through the foundation, I had begun speaking at hospitals, schools, and medical conferences about the dangers of medical gaslighting and the importance of taking young people's pain seriously. Each presentation was both terrifying and empowering, a way of transforming my trauma into something that might prevent others from experiencing similar harm. My athletic life had taken new forms as well. The wheelchair basketball team had led to connections with Paralympic development coaches who had introduced me to wheelchair racing. While I would never compete at the elite level I had once aspired to in able-bodied track, I had found a new competitive outlet that challenged and fulfilled me in unexpected ways. Sometimes the universe has different plans for us, my new coach had told me after my first wheelchair racing event. But that doesn't mean they can't be just as meaningful. Now, as I concluded my presentation at the orientation, a student raised her hand with a question I had come to expect. How do you not hate your family for what they did to you? It was a fair question, and one I had wrestled with extensively. My answer had evolved over time, becoming more nuanced as my own healing progressed. Hate requires energy I need for other things, I explained. I went through periods of intense anger, and that was a necessary part of my process. But holding on to that anger indefinitely would only have paralyzed my spirit as well as my body. I paused, considering how to articulate the complex evolution of my feelings. What I've learned is that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending it didn't cause real harm. It's about acknowledging that harm fully while choosing not to let it define my entire relationship with the people involved. My parents and brother failed me catastrophically in that moment, but they're more than just that failure. They're flawed humans who are genuinely trying to be better now. After the presentation, as attendees mingled during the reception, I noticed a familiar figure making his way toward me, Tyler, now in his final year of his social work program. "That was powerful, Jess," he said, genuine pride in his voice. "You had the whole room captivated." "Thanks for coming," I replied, genuinely touched by his support. "How did your fieldwork interview go?" "I got the placement," he said with a small smile. "Working with at-risk teens starting next semester. They'll be lucky to have you," I told him, and meant it. If anyone could understand how family dynamics could go terribly wrong, it was Tyler. His personal experience, painful as it was, would give him insight many other social workers lacked. Our conversation was interrupted by the approach of a woman I recognized from disability advocacy circles, the director of a national organization that lobbied for improved accessibility legislation. "Jessica Armstrong," she inquired, extending her hand. "I was very impressed by your presentation. We're looking for speakers for our annual conference, and your perspective would be invaluable." As we exchanged contact information, I caught Tyler watching with the expression of mingled pride and something like awe. Later, he would confess that in that moment, he had finally understood something crucial, that my injury, terrible as it was, had not diminished me but had instead revealed strengths neither of us had known I possessed. That evening, I returned to my accessible campus apartment, exhausted but satisfied with the day's events. My roommate, Aisha, another student with a disability, greeted me with takeout food and questions about the presentation. "So basically, your whole family is coming to the big wheelchair race next month?" she asked between bites of pad thai. I nodded. "Mom, Dad, Tyler, Coach Stevens, and Sarah. My personal cheering section." "And you're okay with that? Having them all there?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm not just okay with it, I want them there. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I want them to see who I've become despite it. Maybe even because of it, in some ways." Aisha nodded thoughtfully. "That's some serious emotional evolution right there." She wasn't wrong. The journey from that terrified, betrayed 19-year-old in the hospital bed to the confident, purposeful 21-year-old I was now had been arduous and nonlinear. There had been setbacks, moments of despair, nights spent raging against the unfairness of it all. But there had also been breakthroughs, moments of unexpected joy, and a gradual reclaiming of my sense of self and purpose. The following weekend, I met my parents for our now regular Sunday brunch. Mom had returned to nursing, but in a new role focused on patient advocacy, a direct result of her painful reckoning with her own failure to advocate for me. Dad had retired early from construction management, citing a desire to reassess his priorities after nearly losing his daughter in every way that mattered. "We've been thinking," Mom began as we finished our meals, "about moving closer to campus." "Not to hover," she added quickly, seeing my expression, "but to be more available if you need us. And to be involved with the foundation. We've found a single-story house that's already partially adapted," Dad added. "It would give you another option for holidays and breaks besides the dorms." 2 years ago, I would have interpreted this as an attempt to control me or to ease their guilt. Now, I recognized it as a genuine effort to rebuild our relationship on new terms, terms that respected my independence while acknowledging our continued connection. "I'd like that," I said simply. "As long as it's understood that my life is here now, my classes, my advocacy work, my racing." "Of course," Mom assured me. "We're not trying to rewind the clock. We just want to be part of your future, whatever form that takes." As I wheeled back to campus after brunch, I reflected on the long, difficult path that had led to this moment of tentative peace. The physical paralysis had been only the most visible injury. The emotional wounds had cut just as deep. But unlike my spinal cord injury, those emotional wounds were healing more completely, day by day. The month leading up to the regional wheelchair racing competition passed quickly. Between training sessions, advocacy meetings, and coursework, I barely had time to register my nervousness until the morning of the race arrived. Coach Stevens picked me up early, helping me load my racing chair into his adapted van. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing my unusual quietness. "A little," I admitted. "It's the first time they'll all see me compete like this." He nodded, understanding immediately who they were. "They'll be proud, Jessica." Just like I am. The race venue was bustling with activity when we arrived. Athletes in specialized racing chairs were warming up, supporters were setting up along the course, and officials were making final preparations. I spotted my family immediately. They had arrived early and secured a prime viewing spot near the finish line. Tyler was holding a homemade sign with my name on it, something he would have found mortifying in our previous life. As I prepared for the race, transferring into my sleek racing chair and adjusting my gloves, my mind flashed back to that day at the lake, the moment when everything changed. I could never have imagined then that I would find myself here, preparing to race again, albeit in a different form. The starting horn sounded, and all other thoughts vanished as I channeled my focus into the race. The familiar sensations of competition flooded back, the adrenaline, the strategic positioning, the burn in my shoulders and arms as I pushed harder around each turn. It wasn't running, but it had its own rhythm, its own beauty, its own challenges. I crossed the finish line third, not first as I once would have expected of myself, but respectable for someone still relatively new to the sport. As I caught my breath, my family surrounded me, their faces alight with a pride I hadn't seen directed at me since before the accident. "That was amazing," Tyler said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You found your new path," Mom added, squeezing my shoulder. Dad, never one for many words, simply nodded with suspiciously moist eyes. In that moment, surrounded by the family that had both broken and rebuilt me, I realized something profound. We are more than our worst mistakes and more than our greatest tragedies. We are the sum of how we respond to them, how we rebuild, how we find meaning in the aftermath. My body would never be the same as it was before that fateful dive. My family would never recapture the innocent, if flawed, dynamic we once had. But perhaps what we had built in its place, a relationship based on hard-earned truth, painful growth, and genuine respect, was ultimately stronger than what had been broken. As I prepare to graduate next year with my degree in disability law, I often think about the strange, painful path that led me here. I would never choose to be paralyzed, never wish for the trauma I endured. But I cannot deny that the person I have become in response to that trauma is stronger, more compassionate, and more purposeful than I might otherwise have been. My brother's prank left me paralyzed. My parents' disbelief compounded the damage. The MRI results made them criminals in the eyes of the law. But the true sentence we all served was the painful process of confronting our family's dysfunctional patterns and rebuilding something healthier from the ruins. If you're watching this and struggling with family members who dismiss your pain or minimize your experiences, please know this. Your feelings are valid. Your pain deserves acknowledgement. And sometimes the hardest, but most necessary thing is to keep advocating for yourself even when those who should believe you first are the last to listen. Have you ever experienced being dismissed when you needed to be believed? Or have you been the one who failed to listen when someone needed you to hear them? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone in their struggle to be heard. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and healing. Remember, the journey to recovery is rarely a straight line, but every step forward matters, no matter how small. Thank you for listening to my story. May it remind us all of the power of belief, the importance of accountability, and the possibility of healing even after the deepest betrayals.